Have you ever noticed how easily we slip from describing the world as it is to stating how it should be? From observing human behavior to prescribing moral rules. This seemingly innocent jump points to one of the most fundamental and enduring challenges in ethical philosophy, a concept that underpins much of our moral reasoning. The is-ought problem is profoundly important in ethics because it highlights the logical gap between statements of fact, what is, and statements of value or moral obligation, what ought to be. Simply put, you cannot logically derive an ethical conclusion about what ought to happen solely from factual premises about what is happening. This distinction, famously articulated by the Scottish philosopher David Hume, prevents us from building moral systems directly from observations of the natural world or human behavior, without introducing a value judgment somewhere along the way. The core mechanism behind this importance lies in Hume's argument that factual statements deal with empirical reality and descriptive truths, while moral statements deal with prescriptions, duties, and values. No amount of empirical observation about how humans behave or how the world functions can, on its own, tell us how we should behave or what the world ought to be like. To move from an is to an ought requires an additional premise, often an unstated moral principle or an assumption about what is good or desirable. Failing to recognize this gap can lead to what philosophers call the naturalistic fallacy, incorrectly equating a natural state with a morally good one. To practically apply this understanding, you can start by meticulously scrutinizing arguments, both your own and others, whenever a conclusion about what someone or something ought to do is drawn from purely descriptive information. Ask yourself if there is an unstated value judgment or moral premise linking the factual observations to the prescriptive conclusion. For instance, just because humans have historically engaged in conflict, a factual does not automatically mean that conflict is morally acceptable or that we ought to perpetuate it. Identifying this missing link helps ensure that our moral reasoning is robust and transparent, resting on explicit values rather than hidden assumptions. This analytical rigor is not merely an academic exercise. It forces ethical thinking to be more explicit about its foundational values. By insisting on clarity between descriptive claims and normative claims, the is-ought problem empowers us to critically evaluate not just the conclusions of moral arguments, but the very premises upon which they are built. It allows us to pinpoint where our moral obligations truly originate, whether from reason, divine command, social contract, or other sources, rather than mistakenly believing they emerge directly from the facts themselves. It reminds us that our moral oughts are always a step beyond what simply is. Ultimately, recognizing the is-ought problem improves the quality and clarity of ethical discourse by preventing flawed logical transitions. It teaches us to be more precise in identifying the moral assumptions and value judgments that underpin our ethical claims. This distinction is vital for constructing coherent ethical arguments and for engaging in meaningful debates about what truly constitutes a moral obligation, ensuring that we ground our oughts in carefully considered values, not just observations of reality.